Welcome to pokerstrategy.com, your professional poker school. Selecting the right starting hand is half the battle in low-limit hold'em poker. If you enter the game with the right cards, you'll not only avoid all sorts of messy decisions during the following betting rounds, you'll actually ensure that you often actually have the best hand. In this video, you'll learn how to play before the flop, which cards are playable and when you should play them, and how to squeeze the most profit out of them. You'll get an overview, the starting hands chart, which illustrates the strategy for the first betting round in an easy-to-understand way. Just as in all other strategy sections, you can and should download or print the chart and use it during the game. We'll start off by going over positions on a poker table. Towards the end, we'll start with concrete strategy concepts. What is your position at the table? Exactly when it's your turn to bet at the table depends on where the dealer sits. The more players there are between you and the dealer in an anti-clockwise direction, the earlier it is your turn. This is referred to as position, and your position dictates when it's your turn to bet or act. If your turn is up sooner, then you're in early position. If you're in late position, you'll also be betting relatively late in any betting round. This is important because the earlier it is your turn to act, the stronger your cards need to be. For every player that sits after you in the betting round, the probability that one of these has hands that are stronger than yours grows. The earlier your position, the stronger your cards need to be. A table with 10 players also has 10 positions. These are subcategorized in 4 groups: early, middle, late, and the blinds. The 2 late positions: button and cut-off. The dealer and the player to his right are the 2 late positions. The dealer is also called the button, sometimes known as BU, and the player before him is the cut-off, sometimes shown as CO. The 3 middle positions: MP1, MP2 and MP3. The 3 players who sit next to the late positions in an anti-clockwise direction are the middle positions. They are known as MP1, MP2 and MP3. The 3 early positions: UTG1, UTG2 and UTG3. The 3 players who sit next to the middle positions in an anti-clockwise direction are the early positions. They are also called UTG1, UTG2 and UTG3. The 2 blind positions, SB and BB. The 2 players who paid the small and large blind bets are called the blinds. The player directly next to the dealer is the small blind. He paid the smaller of the 2 mandatory bets. The second player is called the big blind. He paid the larger of the 2 mandatory bets. What occurs when there are less than 10 players? This overview makes the assumption that there are 10 players at the table. That, however, is not always the case. If there are only 9 instead of 10 players at the table, there exists 1 less early position. With 8 players, there will only be 1 of the 3 original early positions left. With 7 players, there are also no early positions. The fewer players there are at the table, the more positions drop away. First the early ones, then the middle positions, and so on. What cards should you play? Essentially speaking, the question, with what cards should you enter the game, is best answered with this: the earlier your position, the stronger your cards need to be. Exactly which cards are most playable can be seen in the Poker Strategy starting hands chart. Simply print it out and you'll always know what you're doing during the game. The chart covers 3 areas: your starting cards, what your opponents did before you, and your position. Let's take a look at the first column, the cards. The left column tells you the possible starting cards. These are expressed using short forms. AA stands for 2 aces or pocket aces, 9-9 stands for 2 nines or pocket nines. If your hand is not listed, throw them away. Holding on to them will bring you nothing. An S next to the cards stands for suited and means that both cards are of the same suit. An O stands for off-suited and indicates that the 2 cards belong to different suits. If there is nothing apart from the cards, e.g. only AK, which stands for ace-king, this means that it doesn't matter if they are in the same suit or not. Now onto the second column. What have your opponents done so far? In the second column you see the possible answer to the question, what did your opponent do? Obviously you play differently if somebody raised, because it means they have strong cards. The third to the 6th columns look at your action depending on your position. Your position tells you what column you should be looking at. If you're in early position, you can refer to the 3rd column. If you're in the small or big blind, use the very last column. What does the term call 20 mean? If you're playing small pairs like pocket fives, you're speculating that you'll hit a three of a kind on the flop. That happens only 12% of the time. But if you do get a hit, you will have a very strong hand that could make you a fair bit of money. This is why it's profitable to raise with a small pair as long as your opponent has enough money. This is why the following rule applies. With a small pair, you should only call a raise when your opponent has at least 20 times the raise amount in his stack. By the way, this applies to you as well, because you can only win as much money as you're able to bet, so it'd be kind of pointless to call if you have less than 20 times the raise left in your stack. That is what the term call 20 means. What happens if you were to raise? How much should it be? Let's look firstly if no one raised yet. For the situation that no player before you raised, your raise should always be 4 big blinds. For example, if you're playing NL10, 5 cent, 10 cent, then you'd raise to 40 cents. For every player that limped, entered the hand before you but didn't raise, only called, you add 1 more big blind to your raise. You raise to 4 big blinds plus 1 big blind per limper. But what if there was exactly 1 raise before you? If only 1 player raised before you, you raise 3 times this raise. If another player before you called the raise, then you add 1 times the raise to your own raise. If 2 players before you called the raise, add 2 times the value to that raise. You raise 3 times the original raise plus 1 times per player who called that raise. But what if there was more than 1 raise before you? If there was 2 or more raises before you, then the situation is pretty clear. Without a monster hand, you don't want to get involved. This is why you put the cards away, regardless of how good they look, unless of course you're holding a pair of aces or kings. In this case, you go all in and bet all your money. So just to repeat, you only play further if you have a pair of aces or a pair of kings, and with these 2 hands, you just go all in. So what do you do when someone raises after you? Let's say you have a pair of aces or kings. If you have a pair of aces or kings, then you should definitely raise. The best thing you can do is to bet all your money by going all in. Beginners sometimes have a problem doing this, but frankly you're already ahead of all the possible pairs by about 80%. You won't find a more profitable opportunity than betting all your money in one go. If you have any other hands, just fold, even when it's an ace-king or an ace-queen, no matter how hard it is for you to do so. The only exception is pairs. But what if you have a made hand in your hand? As mentioned earlier, there is an exception. If you have a pair that's smaller than pocket aces or pocket kings, then you can also call. In those cases when you and your opponent each have a stack that is at least 20 times the amount you need to call. Just like the call 20 rule from the starting hands chart, you are speculating on hitting a 3 of a kind on the flop. If that's the case, you have a pretty good chance of taking your opponent's entire stack. Your opponent raises but only to the basic minimum. Often on the smaller limits, players tend to raise only the minimum amount. No matter what they're thinking, it doesn't make much sense. If you've entered the game and somebody raises only to the minimum, a mim raise, then you should definitely call it. Obviously the exceptions are pocket aces and pocket kings, as you would re-raise when holding those. So in summary, if you've understood how to use the starting hands chart, then you should be fine in the first betting round. Choosing the right starting hands is half the battle, and many players burn through their money at this point. They play too many unplayable hands and don't know when to step away because they believe their cards look good. If you choose your hands to play carefully before the flop, as shown in the starting hands chart, then you'll avoid having to make hair-raising and anxiety-causing decisions after the flop. Especially in the small limits, this is how your opponents throw their money away as well. There is no reason for you to create marginal game situations. Winning by folding is the motto. In the next video, you'll learn which cards you could hit on the flop or in the subsequent betting rounds. The team at Poker Strategy wish you lots of luck at the tables.